Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 52. I'm Enigmius, and today we're continuing with the station, as if there was anything else that we would be doing. We're making actually good progress. I had kind of expected that the station would be more involved and more intricate in the grand scheme of things, but we're kind of fighting a losing battle against the block count at this point. And I don't want to put myself in a position where anything that I build is so over the top that it starts to impair the performance of the game during normal gameplay. The game tends to run slower in build mode with these high polygon, high block count kinds of things, and then when you exit to the normal simulation mode, it seems to pick up a little bit easier. I'm sure there's something to do with the rendering and the way that everything is handled that makes it that way. But it's worth keeping in mind that we don't have unlimited resources in terms of how well the game can run everything when we've got tens of thousands of blocks in most everything that we create. In the last episode, we were putting in these sort of elliptical cross-section structural members between the central cylinder and the outer ring. And the reason why that became a priority is because we had the temporary structure that allow us to keep everything connected, so that after we built the central cylinder, we could make the outer ring, and the game would allow it because everything was connected. We had the blocks in place. But after we got all of that taken care of, and we went to start thinking about putting the systems inside that outer ring, that cavity there, the temporary structure was in the way. So the solution became to replace the temporary structures with the permanent intended structures. We loaded those permanent structures with computer cores, just because having more systems seems to be one of the best ways to increase the fun factor, being able to add all kinds of extra different things. And now we've got that taken care of. We're basically clear on the outer ring to start filling it in without any obstructions, except for obviously the walls of the ring itself. And I decided also now would be a good time to start filling in the central cylinder. And you can see here we're basically just kind of giving ourselves a larger face to start with when placing these blocks, so that we can place the blocks a little bit faster. And the way we do that is we just kind of take some small hull blocks and we fill in the little wee lines that make up the circle, so that we've got a flat face and then we can extend it, etc. You can see everything is going in place there. Now, I come across the idea that the blocks work better if they're larger. So, for example, say you had 1 cubic meter of generator. It would work better as 1 solid cubic meter of generator than it would as, say, 8 or 10 pieces that still added up to 1 cubic meter. So it's better to have 1 piece by volume than a bunch of smaller pieces making up the same volume, because the game would calculate some sort of bonus and it would be better that way. That's what the impression that I got from that whole sort of theory was. But unfortunately, in my own testing, and I haven't done any with this particular station, but with the last ship that we built, I did a little bit of testing, and I can only call it preliminary testing. But what I did was I set up a system, and to be completely honest, I don't even remember specifically what it was. It was like a generator or a shield generator or something like that, where the impact that it would have on the ship's performance would be clearly indicated with the readout on the right-hand side of the screen in build mode. And I made it out of a bunch of small blocks that, when highlighted, when selected and applied with the merge feature, would become one larger block, and basically looked at the stats while they were smaller blocks, and then clicked on the merge button until they became the one larger block, and then looked at the stats, and there was absolutely no difference. So in order to say that's exhaustive testing, I would have to do it with every different kind of potential system that you could put onto a ship and merge in that way. And I think you can pretty much merge any kind of system that way. So there's been a certain amount of effort on my part based on that information that I had to try and make sure that the blocks that I use for the systems on a ship are as large as possible, as opposed to having them smaller bits, because that's what I was led to believe was the better way to approach things. And now I'm pretty convinced that it's not. I'm pretty convinced that it doesn't really make a difference. 10 cubic meters of generator appears to work the same, whether it's all one big chunk or 10 individual cubic meters, or sorry, 1 individual cubic meter times 10. So all of that having been said, you can see here I'm still trying to place the largest blocks possible, because I arrived at this conclusion, and I did a little bit of poking around after I had done this, and decided that for future reference, I'm probably not going to put as much effort into trying to ensure that we've got the largest blocks possible. We can just kind of place things in the locations that make sense. It still makes sense from a performance standpoint to have larger blocks. Basically keep the block count down as much as you can. Seems to be a really good way to look at it, and something to keep in mind as we go through the whole build process. If you have the option to do something with one large block, don't do it with 10 little ones, because that could probably impact the game's performance to some extent, depending on how many other blocks are involved, etc., etc. Usually what it comes down to is there's a certain amount you can get away with in terms of performance requirements based on what you're trying to get the game to render. Once you get to that threshold, anything you add after that is going to have consequences. And if you're constantly below that threshold, then it might seem at times like you're able to do a lot of crazy things that other people can't get away with, and it's just because you're below that. So for example, let's say your computer is capable of easily handling a structure or a ship with 100,000 blocks in a system where nothing else is there. There's no other ships, there's no other stations, there's no asteroids, 100,000 blocks, 60 frames per second, no problem. But all of a sudden you start jumping in ships and spawning in stations, and because you're right at that threshold, the maximum that everything can handle, each of these little things that you add starts to carry with it a noticeable dip in performance. It's not a linear sort of thing. You're good up until a certain point, and then after that there's a problem. So trying, for me, to keep that in mind and be aware that we're already looking at a station that's over 40,000 blocks, and we've still got more stuff that I want to add. That's sort of the tricky part. We've got this central cylinder now basically completely filled in. Hooray, that's what I wanted. I wanted to not have any wasted space. If I can't think of a system that I want to go in a particular space, or it's too small to really worry about, I still fill it in with hull blocks, a little bit of added protection. Now we're working on this outer ring, and this is basically all going to be cargo storage. I did some reading into the wiki on stations. There's about a half a page on the wiki about stations, and it's basically talking about the basics. It's got a bunch of links to the specific different kinds of stations, which is good, but it's an early access game, and it's something that I've seen with other games, other early access games, people complaining. Someone should fill out the wiki. People should it's always the one guy telling what other people should do to make his life easier, right? Someone should do that because I need it. Yeah. By the way, it's early access, and nobody wants to populate a wiki with early access stuff because it can change at a moment's notice. So there wasn't a lot of information to be had about stations, and I'm okay with it because it's early access, and I wouldn't ask someone to do something that I wasn't willing to do myself, and I wouldn't be willing to try and populate a wiki with the mechanics of an early access game. That having been said, I was able to take a look at some of the different kinds of stations and kind of get a feel for some of the things that might be important to have for any given station, and cargo capacity appears to be one of those things that's a good thing to have regardless of what kind of station you're building. I was a little bit surprised to find that even a research station like what this one is can still use different kinds of commodities. And so for me, without being able to see something that specifically says, yes, you need storage capacity for a research station because you'll be using X amount of this and blah, blah, blah. I got enough information out of it to suggest very strongly that there are certain commodities that you may need or that the station may use. And in order to have an inventory of those commodities on hand, you would have to have some sort of inventory storage capacity. So that's why we're putting cargo containers in the outer ring. That was the plan at the beginning of the last episode, but we got a little bit sidetracked, as you can see, and now we're kind of getting back on top of things. We're getting back into a bit of a rhythm. Now that we've got this main sort of element with the cargo containers filled in, there's no wasted space anywhere in this outer ring so far. We've got everything taken care of, and I'm actually just going around now and I'm merging all of the face blocks that I used to make the larger cargo container blocks so that everything is the fewest blocks possible. Everything is just the way that it's supposed to be, according to me. And then we're going to carry on and continue with the structure of this outer ring. And like I was talking about in the last episode, I didn't want to do like a torus style where it's kind of like the donut circular cross section. But at the same time, I didn't want it to be ending in 90-degree angles either at the tops, like around the corners and things like that. So just a little bit of a curve coming up towards the top and the bottom, and then it's going to flatten out so we have room to place turrets and whatever else you might want to add there. And just carrying on with what we had started in the last episode before we realized that we had to make some adjustments before we could continue. In the process of building in this little extra bit of structural stuff, this little bit of a curved section, there's going to be a little bit more space that we can use. We can place some things in here. I'm thinking in terms of torpedo storage, maybe to some extent, but I'm not 100% decided. It's one of those things that could go either way. It could just be regular hull blocks, just add a little bit of extra protection. It's not that critical. We're not talking about a huge amount of space that we're going to need. But additionally, once we get this outer ring buttoned up and taken care of, that central cylinder is going to have, basically, if you forget that we're in space and top and bottom don't really have much meaning, the top of that cylinder is going to have a spheroid sort of shape. If you imagine a sphere and then you squish it, we'll have something like that on the top. Think of it like a bridge or a main sort of control area where, you know, the people live in the central cylindrical section, and then when it's time to go to work, they go up to the spheroid up top, and then the bottom of that central cylinder is going to be the hangar bay. And I want to try and arrange that in a way that looks kind of interesting, without necessarily sacrificing too much the performance of the hangar bay, because as I understand it, and I'll have to double check, but that might be one of those few blocks that actually does benefit from being a certain total size as opposed to being a bunch of little babby hangars. So I want to be careful before I start messing around with that, before I even start sort of cementing in my mind the design of that part of the ship. I want to make sure that I've got sort of a handle on how that's going to work. And the fighters are really just there because fighters. I mean, you've got a station that can have a hangar and launch fighters to defend itself. Why wouldn't you? So we'll definitely be investing some time into that. The original plan, in my mind, before I started building this and started seeing the block count go up and up and up, was to take this structure that you see here, once we've got this outer ring finished, and use that as a stamp, basically, and make a bunch of these things so that you've got a longer cylinder with a bunch of these outer rings around it, but the block count would be up into the hundreds of thousands if we did that, and I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go in order to get what we want out of this situation. One thing that I did want to point out, and this both amused me and surprised me at the very same time is that we've been working on the station. We actually counted the number of blocks at the beginning for the layout in terms of how large the station would be in certain directions. I believe the central ring was 300 blocks, 300 cubes, based on the smallest cube that we could make. It was a 300 diameter, and then 600 diameter for the inside of the outer ring, and 660 diameter for the outside of the outer ring. It seemed really, really big, and if you look like this, you can see it seems very, very large until you get something like this station here in the background, that long skinny thing on the left, and then you zoom out with the camera and you finally realize just what size this station is relative to everything else in this system. We're going to be rescaling this station when we're done because it's a little bit on the miniature side. I thought that was kind of funny. I wanted to share that with you guys. So the next episode, we're going to finish off the outer ring. It's not going to take much longer, and then we're going to start working on those extra bits from the central cylinder. So if you want to be notified about that, next episode and other episodes in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.